What's up everyone, it's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And for the first deck that we're going to look at in 2024, of course, we know the ban announcement on December 4th, where we saw Mono Green take a big hit, and we saw the Explorer, or I guess not even the Explorer, the Discover combo deck that was super just busted, ended up getting banned out of the format, just weeks after actually being released in Lost Caverns Ixalan. And of course, Smuggler's Copter being unbanned just before we had the regional championship in Atlanta, or yeah, the DreamHack regional championship at Atlanta. And I've went into detail some of my thoughts before the event and after, so if any of that interests you, be sure to check those out as well. And of course, before we get too deep into Rakdos Midrange and kind of study it and kind of understand why it's currently the most played deck in Pioneer, all things considered, and really who's shocked by that. If you have not already, consider subscribing to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when videos like this and others get posted. And if you go into the description down below, you will see links to the not only the Pioneer deck, Rakdos Midrange that we're looking at today, but the Discord server as well. Feel free to join over there if that's something that interests you. So Rakdos Midrange, we talked about in a video prior, kind of going over the bannings, that I think the immediate winners of the banning were Rakdos Midrange and Is the Phoenix, just because they were the most played decks that didn't have anything hit from it, and it's as presumably worst matchup also took a hit, So Rakdos Midrange in itself is already like a pretty good deck if you're pretty aware of what's going on in the format and you're just a fairly good player in terms of just kind of like your mechanics and everything. Rakdos Midrange is going to be a good deck for you to play just because you're able to kind of pivot and kind of go in whatever direction you need. Plus, obviously, the power creep and magic. I think cards have went from, playing both sides but being more one way than the other, and are kind of like blurring the lines of like being aggressive but then also having its control elements and things like that. So definitely in the benefit of like Rakdos Midrange, red and black have been kind of the best colors to be playing as of recent. So why not just jam them together and play with some of the pretty broken cards available to you in the format. So, the big thing about this deck now, the addition of Smuggler's Copter. Recently unbanned, in that December 4th ban list, and it's a 2-mana 3/3 that has flying, and when it attacks or blocks, you may draw a card, and if you do, discard a card and accrue 1. So basically, any creature that you have in this deck is going to be able to accrue Smuggler's Copter pretty easily. Going even further, the fact that Smuggler's Copter, at a point, you can just kind of get in over the air, it's evasive, and it can end up drawing you extra cards and discarding cards to maybe find something like a Kroxa indirectly in a way. It fuels Kroxa, or it's just a way you can get it into the graveyard, so you can then escape it later. Of course, just getting to fill up your graveyard, get rid of some dead cards, it just kind of like where mid-range kind of suffers is that you have like an aggressive hand against like a control deck, and or rather you have a control hand against a control deck, or you have an aggressive hand against an aggro deck, and of course you want to kind of flip-flop your game plan so you're kind of doing the opposite of what your opponent's doing. And Smuggler's Copter, in a way, kind of gets to do that by, like fatal pushes in a matchup where your opponent really doesn't have, physical cards that you can get rid of with Fatal Push. Smuggler's Copter is going to be able to loot those away. You're hopefully going to be drawing relevant spells. You're going to be able to hit your land drops. And of course, just discard your Fatal Pushes, or if you're kind of flooded on lands, it's a way that you can get rid of some extra lands and hopefully draw some spells. You can obviously fill Kroxa. There's some weird tricks with like Graveyard Trespasser where like you could start like eating cards from, eating creature cards from your graveyard that you discard to like drain your opponent and deal those last few points of damage. By and large, though, Smuggler's Copter, has been pretty good. It was obviously good enough to get banned early on in the days of Pioneer, and Wizards finds it deemable to come back, and I think it's definitely not going to be near as good as it was. And for transparency's sake, I didn't think Smuggler's Copter was so good back then that you just absolutely couldn't have Smuggler's Copter in the format. But kind of glad to have it back. The Looter Scooter is loose, and of course, being a major player in kind of this Rakdos deck, Uh, Going forward, Fable the Mirrorbreaker 2 is just another card that kind of synergizes well on the curve with Smuggler's Copter, where you play turn 2 Smuggler's Copter, you play turn 3 Fable, you make the 2-2, the 2-2 gets to crew the Copter, attack, and get your Smuggler's Copter trigger, and so on. And then kind of from there, you're just like wanting to play these other creatures. I mean, you can play a Shieldred on like turn 4, immediately like crew the Copter or attack with, your Fable token, your Smuggler's Copter, what have you, and then continue to kind of like push the advantage by getting to discard some more cards and then draw more cards with Fable, draw a discard with Smuggler's Copter, and you just kind of get to a point where you see so many cards, you're more than likely you're going to have at least a very good shot at finding an answer to something that your opponent is doing, or at least being able to ditch the cards that are useless in the matchup and be able to hopefully draw cards that are a little bit better for you. The creature is really not changing too much. Inti Sensual of the Sun is a new card from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Whenever you attack, you can discard a card. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. Gains trample until end of turn. And whenever you discard one or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step, synergizing pretty well with Smuggler's Copter and Fable the Mirrorbreaker. Inti can, just like crew up Copter, attack, put a counter on Copter, and then of course you draw a discard, and then you essentially get to look at another card with Inti that you can then play on your next turn, hopefully finding like a land drop, or maybe finding like a 3-mana spell, so on, or what have you. Even finding like a 4-mana spell, because presumably you're doing this on turn 3, playing Inti and then crewing, leaving up a mana so then you can like Thoughtseize or Fatal Push, what have you. Going further, I mean, Archfiend of the Dross has become more of a common thing in these Rakdos decks, just a one of. I've had a game specifically playing with Rakdos where you flip 2 Fables, and obviously the combo in a way with 2 flip Fables is that they can copy each other. So you have one copy the other, and then you have that copy one, and then so on. You can make as many copies of Reflection of Kijiki equal to the number of to the amount of mana you have if you have 2 Reflection of Kijiki on the battlefield. And Archfiend of the Dross is easily one of the best ones to copy. So if you have like 6 mana, you make 6 additional copies of, Reflection of Kijiki. And then you untap, hopefully play your 7th land, and then you could just make 7 copies of Archfiend of the Dross. And from there, you're swinging with, 8 copies of Archfiend of the Dross because you have 7 copies plus the original. 8 times 6 off the top of my head, I believe is like 48. So you swing for 48 damage, and which is more than likely going to kill your opponent, unless they're on like a Melia combo and they've got to go through it at least once or what have you. But it also says that whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. So there is ways where like even if your opponent like can kind of block the damage and everything, your opponent's going to lose tons and tons of life. You could even make a ton of copies of like Archfiend of the Dross and then like kill one of their creatures and then end up losing like 10 or 12 life from that one creature dying. So Archfiend gives you some pretty explosive potential in this deck. Of course, you have Shieldred the Apocalypse, just the best like 4-mana card that doesn't ever need to attack or do anything. Just the fact that it sits on the battlefield, and of course in combination with cards like Thoughtseize and kind of getting to put pressure on your opponent, with all these other spells, like Shieldred ends up being kind of like the top of the pyramid here of terms of threats, so they have to get rid of it. But you're still hitting in with like Smuggler's Copters. You have Bloodtithe Harvester, which is pretty aggressive, can be used as like a removal spell, etc. Inties, Croxes that you can get back, Bone Crusher Giants, Graveyard Trespassers. Like instead of just this kind of like you knock off Shieldred, then half the pyramid falls. You knock off Shieldred, you've literally knocked off the top block, but like you still have all this that you need to beat. And of course, like blue-white control coming in, like specifically like the creatures, like Supreme Verdict's pretty good to kind of clear everything up. But if you're a non-Supreme Verdict deck or just a non-Wrath deck, you're going to have a very hard time managing the threats from Rakdos midrange. And of course, kind of like what we were talking about, where the cards kind of blur the line between, being a good card that can kind of do both, but is a little bit better at one. Definitely these cards being able to do both. Where like Graveyard Trespasser, 3-mana 3/3, and the other side is a 4/4. board, discard a card, so you 2-for-1 your opponent just from them trying to deal with your Graveyard Trespasser, and of course getting some graveyard hate as well. This card is specifically very aggressive and is pretty like controlling in a way, just for the fact that a 3-mana 4, the potential for a 3-mana 4/4 is huge, and of course your opponent getting 2-for-1 is pretty massive as well. Bone Crusher Giant getting to remove a threat and then becoming a 4/3, and then also damaging your opponent if they try to target it. Croxa eventually going to come down like unchecked. An unchecked Croxa is so scary when, essentially if you're Hellbent and you're going to your turn and you're staring down a Croxa, if it doesn't remove the Croxa and it's a spell, you almost have to keep it so you don't take the additional 3 damage. And you have to do a cost-benefit analysis on if playing that spell is worth it. And if you draw a land, like it's just absolutely just game over. Going even farther, like Fatal Push Thoughtseize, Heartless Act, as like your removal options / like control options. The mana base super simple: 3 Cliffs, 4 Blightstep Pathway, 4 Blood Crypt. You have 3 Haunted Ridge. You have your Sulphur Springs, 1 copy, and then you have some more utility lands. You have like Den of the Bugbear that you can turn into a 3/2. You activate it multiple times and create multiple 1/1s when this thing attacks, which is neat. The Eye Tyrant, same thing. You can activate it multiple times and eat multiple cards from the graveyard. Soakens in to make some 1/1s. And you have Takanuma that can get back a creature or planeswalker. Of course, you're going to be only getting a creature back, but with the ability that you have to kind of fill up the graveyard with Smuggler's Copter and Fable, of course, just naturally playing out the game as well, Takanuma is going to get back something very good, and raise some havoc for your opponent. Cyborg, Duress, Damping Sphere, Unlicensed Hearse, Go Blank, Hitsugu consumes all, Kolaghan's Command, and Path to Peril as like some of the other options in the sideboard. And that is Rakdos Midrange for the Pioneer format. Overall, Rakdos Midrange is showing why, and hopefully this video has kind of helped you explain why Rakdos Midrange is one of the best decks to be playing in the Pioneer metagame right now. I think if you're pretty comfortable and confident with kind of how the metagame goes and kind of know some of the ins and outs of some of the other matchups or how some of the other decks want to play, I think Rakdos Midrange kind of plays into your wheelhouse very nicely. There's games where your opponent stumbles and you can close out the game very quickly, like curving Bloodtithe Harvester into Croxa, or excuse me, Bloodtithe Harvester into like Bone Crusher Giant, Graveyard Trespasser, and then Archfiend or Shieldred. The game is going to be over super quick, really, before your opponent even knows it. And even in the games where it's kind of like this grind fest, I mean, you do have Smuggler's Copter to kind of draw and fix your draw in a way to get rid of some dead lands at some in the late game, and some of the other, dead cards where maybe like Fatal Push or Thoughtseize, especially Thoughtseize, like the late game is not usually all that great. So just being able to ditch the Smuggler's Copter, Fable, and Mirror Breaker, and so on. This deck is still very powerful. I kind of wish they would have hit Fable in the ban list, but it is what it is. Fable's here to stay for the time being. And it's only a matter of time if we see any change happen to the Pioneer format that could affect the format positively. I think the fact that leaving the second and third most played deck untouched and just saying like, okay, like this is fine, like we'll leave it, is kind of a telling sign of the direction I guess the format is taking. But overall right now it doesn't seem like it's awful. Amelia combo could probably go, but for my creature combo self, I definitely don't want to see it go anywhere. But personally, that's just me. So anyway, that's gonna do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed this kind of walkthrough, deck tech of sorts of Rakdos Midrange. If you did, please leave a like on the video, comment down below if there's a Pioneer deck that you would like to see. Of course, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bells, check out the links in the description down below. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.